The massive station hung in the darkness of space like a jewel made of metal and light. Viridian Prime orbited below, a planet of purple oceans and silver continents that served as neutral ground for the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the viewing port of his ship, the horizon's edge, and felt his stomach tighten with nervousness. Today would determine humanity's place among the stars. Beside him stood Lisa Grant, his chief science officer and the smartest person he had ever known. She held a datapad containing every achievement humanity had accomplished in the last 50 years, since they had discovered faster-than-light travel. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. Danny Wright, the first officer, joined them at the window. He was a tall man with steady eyes and a calm manner that helped keep the crew focused during difficult moments. He looked at the station and let out a low whistle. The Galactic Council station was enormous, easily 10 times the size of anything humans had ever built. Ships from dozens of worlds docked at its many ports. Some of the vessels looked like living creatures, their hulls pulsing with bioluminescent light. Others were geometric perfections of crystal and energy. The human research vessel looked like a child's toy in comparison. A communication signal beeped on the console. Danny moved to answer it, then nodded to Jake. They had been granted permission to dock and present their petition. Jake straightened his uniform and tried to project confidence he did not entirely feel. The docking procedure took 20 minutes. Human technology worked, but it was slower and less elegant than what the other races used. Jake noticed the impatient flickering of lights from a nearby Zelthari vessel, as if they were annoyed at having to wait for the primitive humans to park their ship properly. The delegation was small, just Jake, Lisa, and Danny, along with 2 security officers who would wait outside the council chamber. They walked through corridors that seemed to shift and change color as they passed, the station's architecture responding to the presence of different species. The walls showed images of great civilizations, their histories stretching back thousands upon thousands of years. They entered the council chamber and Jake felt his breath catch. The room was circular and vast, with seating arranged in ascending tiers that rose toward a domed ceiling showing the stars beyond. Hundreds of beings filled the space, creatures of every imaginable form. Some breathed oxygen like humans. Others existed in sealed environmental pods filled with methane or liquid ammonia. A few appeared to be made of pure energy, held in containment fields that glowed with soft light. At the center of the chamber stood a platform for petitioners. Jake led his team down the long walkway, feeling the weight of countless alien eyes upon them. The chamber grew quiet as they took their positions. Ambassador Thelxar of the Zelthari called the session to order. He was a being of living crystal, his body refracting light into rainbow patterns that danced across the chamber walls. When he spoke, his voice resonated like chimes in the wind, translated instantly into a language Jake could understand through the neural implant all council visitors received. Jake began his presentation. He spoke of Earth, a world that had nearly destroyed itself in warfare and environmental collapse before finding unity. He described how humanity had reached for the stars, driven by curiosity and the dream of something greater. He explained the discovery of the quantum slip drive that allowed faster-than-light travel, a breakthrough that had occurred just 50 years ago. Lisa took over, displaying holographic images of human achievements. She showed their medical advances, treatments for diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. She demonstrated their artificial intelligence systems, sophisticated networks that could process vast amounts of information. She presented their quantum computing capabilities and the theoretical physics that pushed the boundaries of understanding reality itself. The chamber remained silent, but it was not the silence of interest. It was the silence of beings waiting politely for something tedious to end. When Lisa finished, Jake made his formal request. Humanity wished to join the Galactic Trade Alliance, to share their knowledge and learn from the great civilizations that had come before them. They offered friendship and cooperation, asking only to be recognized as equals in the community of spacefaring races. The silence broke with a sound that could only be described as laughter. It came from dozens of species at once, creating a cacophony of chirps, rumbles, whistles, and harmonics that merged into one overwhelming expression of amusement. Thelxar raised a crystalline appendage, and the laughter subsided. He regarded the human delegation with what might have been pity, though reading emotion in living crystal was difficult. He spoke, and his words cut through Jake like knives. Humanity was young, barely more than children playing with technology they had stumbled upon by accident rather than earned through centuries of development. Their ships were crude, their understanding of the universe shallow, their achievements insignificant compared to races that had been exploring the cosmos for millennia. Grixtal of the Korthans stood next. He was a massive being, 8 feet tall with 4 arms and skin like armored plates. His species were warriors and conquerors who had carved out an empire through strength and superior technology. He looked at the humans with eyes that showed no warmth. He called their ships toy rockets, fragile metal boxes that would crumble under any real combat situation. He mocked their quantum drive as primitive, noting that Korthan children learned to build better engines in their basic education. He suggested that humans should return to their little world and play for a few more centuries before bothering their betters. A representative of the Velkari species added her voice. She was ancient, her body more machine than organic matter, enhanced through technologies that humans could barely comprehend. She stated that humanity's biological and technological development was thousands of years behind the accepted standards for council membership. Their medicine was crude, their enhancements non-existent, their understanding of biotechnology laughable. Jake tried to respond, to defend his species and their accomplishments, but his words seemed to evaporate in the face of such overwhelming dismissal. Lisa's data, so impressive to human eyes, meant nothing to beings who had mastered faster than light travel when Earth was still in its ice age. The vote was called. Not a single member of the Galactic Council voted to admit humanity to the Trade Alliance. Instead, they offered what Thelgzar called a generous compromise. Humanity could have junior observer status, a position typically reserved for species that had not yet achieved spaceflight. They would be allowed to watch council proceedings but not participate. They could not vote on any matters, could not access advanced technologies, could not trade freely with member worlds. It was an insult, and everyone in the chamber knew it. Several species made sounds that their translators could not quite capture, but the meaning was clear. They were laughing at the presumptuous humans who thought 50 years of space travel made them worthy of standing alongside civilizations that had existed for eons. Thelgzar delivered the final blow with what he probably thought was kindness. He suggested that humanity return home, continue to develop, and perhaps in a few thousand years they might have accomplished something actually noteworthy. Until then, they should be content with their small corner of space and not waste the Council's time with premature applications. The session was dismissed. Jake and his team walked back through those shifting corridors, past the monuments to great civilizations, back to their small ship that suddenly seemed even more inadequate. None of them spoke during the journey. What was there to say? They had been judged and found wanting by the galaxy itself. As the Horizon's Edge undocked and turned toward human space, Jake looked back at the magnificent station one last time. He felt anger burning in his chest alongside the humiliation. Humanity deserved better than this. They were capable of so much more than these arrogant aliens believed. He just wished he could prove it. The journey back to human space took 3 days, and every hour felt heavier than the last. Jake spent most of his time in his quarters, reviewing the council session recordings and wondering what humanity could have done differently. Lisa tried to lose herself in her work, analyzing alien technology signatures they had detected at the station. Danny kept the crew focused on their duties, knowing that idle hands would only breed more disappointment. When the Horizon's Edge finally approached Gateway Station near Mars, Jake felt a small measure of relief. At least here they were among their own kind, where their achievements were recognized even if the galaxy refused to acknowledge them. The station was modest by alien standards, but it represented humanity's determination to reach beyond their home world. The docking was smooth and efficient. Jake prepared to file his mission report with Earth Command, a task he was dreading because it meant putting their failure into official words. But before he could begin, his communication console lit up with an incoming message marked with the highest security clearance he had ever seen. The message was brief and encrypted with codes that took his ship's computer feral minutes to decode. It came from Admiral Claire Hughes, the head of United Earth Space Command, and one of the most respected figures in human space exploration. She requested his immediate presence at a set of coordinates that were not listed on any public navigation charts. The location was identified only as Project Sanctuary. Jake stared at the message for a long time. He had never heard of Project Sanctuary, and the security classification suggested something far beyond routine military operations. The coordinates placed the location deep in the Kuiper Belt, the vast ring of ice and rock beyond Neptune's orbit where few ships ventured. He called Lisa and Danny to his quarters and showed them the message. Lisa's eyes widened when she saw the classification level. Danny simply nodded, his military training making him comfortable with following orders even when those orders made no sense. They took a small shuttle, leaving the Horizon's Edge docked at Gateway Station with instructions for the crew to take shore leave and speak to no one about the council meeting. The shuttle was designed for short-range transport, and Jake pushed its engines harder than recommended, his curiosity overcoming his usual caution. The flight into the Kuiper Belt took 6 hours. The space around them grew darker as they left the inner solar system behind, the sun shrinking to just another bright star in the eternal night. Ice fragments drifted past their windows, some no larger than pebbles and others the size of mountains. The coordinates led them to what appeared to be an unremarkable cluster of asteroids and frozen debris. Jake slowed the shuttle to a crawl, wondering if the message had been some kind of mistake or test. But then his sensor board lit up with scanning beams of incredible sophistication, far beyond anything the shuttle's systems could produce. A voice came over the communication channel, calm and professional, welcoming them to Project Sanctuary and providing new coordinates for approach. Jake followed the instructions, guiding the shuttle toward what still looked like empty space filled with tumbling ice. Then everything changed. The space in front of them began to shimmer like heat waves on a summer road. The effect spread outward in a perfect sphere hundreds of miles across. For a moment, Jake thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But Lisa gasped beside him and Danny leaned forward in his seat, confirming that they were all seeing the same impossible thing. The shimmer fell away like a curtain being dropped, and what lay beyond took Jake's breath completely away. A city floated in space, but calling it merely a city seemed inadequate for what he was witnessing. The structure was a massive cylinder, rotating slowly on its axis to provide artificial gravity. Jake's instruments reported dimensions that seemed impossible, 30 miles long and 5 miles in diameter, but the size was only part of what amazed him. The city's hull was covered in what looked like a combination of advanced metals and exotic materials that seemed to shift and change as he watched. Lights glowed from thousands of windows arranged in precise geometric patterns. Solar arrays stretched out like wings, capturing the distant sunlight and converting it to power. Agricultural sections were visible through transparent sections of hull, showing green growing things that should not exist this far from Earth. Around the city floated a fleet of ships that made Jake's heart race. These were not the modest research vessels and patrol craft that humanity showed to the galaxy. These were warships, sleek and deadly, their hulls painted in dark colors that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He counted at least 20 capital ships, each one larger than anything in the official human fleet, along with dozens of smaller support vessels and craft he could not immediately identify. A docking bay opened in the city's side, and guidance beams drew their shuttle inside. The bay was enormous, capable of holding hundreds of ships. Jake guided the shuttle to a designated landing pad, his hands moving automatically while his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Admiral Claire Hughes was waiting for them when they disembarked. She was a woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. She wore a uniform that was similar to standard Space Command issue, but with subtle differences that suggested a separate chain of command. She greeted Jake with a firm handshake and a slight smile that held secrets. She welcomed Lisa and Danny as well, then gestured for them to follow her. As they walked through the corridors of the docking bay, Jake noticed personnel moving with purpose and efficiency. These were not just military crew. He saw scientists, engineers, and even families with children walking past. The Admiral led them to an observation lounge that offered a panoramic view of the city's interior. What Jake saw there made him stop and stare in wonder. The inner surface of the rotating cylinder was covered with buildings, parks, and infrastructure that looked like a thriving metropolis transported into space. Trees grew in organized groves, their branches reaching toward the axis of rotation, where the artificial gravity faded to zero. Rivers and streams flowed along carefully engineered channels. People moved through streets and walkways, going about their lives as if living in a space station 30 miles long was the most natural thing in the world. Admiral Hughes began to explain, and her words reshaped everything. Jake thought he knew about humanity's place in the galaxy. For the past 40 years, while Earth had been presenting itself to the aliens as humble newcomers still learning the basics of space travel, a select group of humans had been working on something far more ambitious. Project Sanctuary was the result of that work, a city and fleet built in absolute secrecy. The Admiral explained the reasoning behind the deception. When humanity first encountered alien civilizations, it became clear that they would be judged by standards that took thousands of years to achieve. The choice was either to accept a position of permanent inferiority or to buy time by appearing less advanced than they truly were. Humanity chose deception. While the official fleet consisted of research vessels and modest patrol craft, the real resources went into building New Horizon, as the city was officially named, and the warships that protected it. The best minds from Earth were recruited, told they were working on classified defense projects, and brought to this hidden facility where they could innovate without alien eyes watching their progress. Jake felt his understanding of recent history shifting. The Council's mockery suddenly seemed less devastating and more like confirmation that the deception had worked. Humanity had been underestimated exactly as planned, giving them the freedom to build strength while the galaxy dismissed them as insignificant children. Lisa asked the obvious question, why reveal this now? Admiral Hughes smiled again, this time with something that looked like pride. She explained that the time for hiding was coming to an end. Recent intelligence suggested that some alien races were becoming aggressive toward human colonies, seeing them as easy targets. The Corthans in particular had been making threatening moves, testing human responses and finding them weak. The Admiral gestured toward the viewport where the city of New Horizon gleamed in the starlight. Soon, she said, humanity would need to show the galaxy what they had really built during those 50 years of apparent mediocrity. The Council had mocked humans and dismissed their achievements, but they had never imagined what humans could accomplish when properly motivated. Danny asked about the fleet and the Admiral's expression turned serious. She offered to show them everything, to let them understand the full scope of what humanity had created, but she warned them that once they knew the truth, they would become part of Project Sanctuary's inner circle, bound by oaths and responsibilities that would change their lives forever. Jake looked at Lisa and Danny. He saw his own emotions reflected in their faces, shock and wonder mixed with a growing sense of pride and purpose. He turned back to Admiral Hughes and told her they wanted to see everything. The Admiral nodded as if she had expected no other answer and led them deeper into New Horizon, toward secrets that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of humanity. Admiral Hughes took them through corridors that hummed with energy and purpose. The walls were made of materials Jake had never seen before, surfaces that seemed to shift between solid metal and something more fluid. Every few hundred feet they passed security checkpoints where guards in advanced armor nodded respectfully to the Admiral while scanning the visitors with devices that made Jake's skin tingle. They emerged onto an observation platform that overlooked the city's main residential district. Jake stood at the railing and tried to absorb what he was seeing. Buildings rose in elegant curves and spirals, their architecture mixing the best of human design with innovations that came from having no ground to build upon. People walked along streets that curved upward with the rotation of the cylinder, disappearing into the distance where perspective made them seem to walk on walls and ceilings. Children played in parks where trees grew in careful rows, their roots fed by hydroponic systems hidden beneath artificial soil. Streams flowed through channels that followed the rotation, creating waterfalls that defied normal physics by falling sideways from one level to another. The air smelled clean and fresh, recycled by systems so advanced that it was indistinguishable from breathing on Earth. Lisa pointed to a massive structure near the city's center axis where gravity would be minimal. It was a sphere of transparent material filled with what looked like gardens floating in zero gravity. Plants grew in every direction, their leaves and flowers creating a three-dimensional maze of green and color. People in light suits drifted through the space, tending the plants or simply enjoying the unique environment. The Admiral explained that New Horizon was home to over 200,000 people. Scientists and engineers made up the largest group, but there were also teachers, doctors, artists, and families who had chosen to make this hidden city their home. Children were born here, grew up here, and many had never set foot on Earth. They were the first generation of humans who truly belonged to space rather than to any planet. They took a transport tube that carried them through the city at high speed. The walls of the tube transparent so they could see the sprawling metropolis passing by. The tube brought them to the industrial section, a vast area near the city's core where the rotation was slower and gravity lighter. Here the real work of Project Sanctuary took place. Kevin Palmer met them at the entrance to the main research facility. He was a man in his 40s with oil stains on his hands and an expression of barely contained excitement. He had been head of advanced weapons development for the past 10 years, and the Admiral said he was responsible for some of humanity's most impressive technological leaps. Kevin led them into a laboratory filled with equipment that made Lisa's eyes light up with professional interest. Holographic displays showed complex equations and three-dimensional models of ship components. Fabrication machines hummed in the background, assembling parts from raw materials with molecular precision. Teams of engineers worked at various stations, calling out measurements and adjustments in the comfortable shorthand of people who had worked together for years. But Kevin did not want to show them the laboratory. He wanted to show them the shipyards. They took another transport tube that carried them to the outer rim of New Horizon, where the military facilities were located. The tube opened into an observation gallery that looked out upon something that made Jake's breath catch for the third time that day. The shipyard was a structure attached to New Horizon like a massive growth, extending for miles into space. Dozens of vessels in various stages of construction filled the yard, held in place by magnetic fields and worked on by crews in advanced spacesuits. But what drew Jake's attention was the completed ships that floated in formation beyond the construction zone. These were nothing like the vessels humanity showed to the galaxy. The hulls were sleek and predatory, their lines suggesting speed and power in equal measure. Dark materials absorbed the starlight, making the ships look like holes cut into space itself. Weapons arrays were visible along their flanks, ports and emitters for systems Jake could only guess at. The smallest of these warships was twice the size of the Horizon's edge. Kevin began pointing out features with obvious pride. The hulls were made of what he called smart matter, a material that could reconfigure itself based on mission requirements. It could harden to absorb impacts, spread out to dissipate energy weapons, or even seal breaches by flowing like liquid metal. The material was self-repairing, using nanotechnology that worked constantly to maintain hull integrity. The engines used a refinement of the quantum slip drive that was far beyond what official human ships possessed. These vessels could achieve faster than light speeds that would make them competitive with most alien military craft. More importantly, they could make micro-jumps, tiny faster than light hops that made them nearly impossible to target in combat. But the weapons were what really set these ships apart. Kevin explained the plasma lance arrays, focused energy weapons that could punch through most known shield technologies. He described the quantum torpedo systems that could bend space to deliver devastating explosive payloads. Then he told them about something he simply called the hammer. The hammer was a gravitational weapon that could create localized distortions in space-time. Kevin's explanation involved complex physics that went over Jake's head, but the demonstration video made the concept clear. A test firing showed space itself warping around a target drone. The drone crumpled like paper in a fist, its hull compressing under impossible gravitational forces before being released and breaking apart into component atoms. Lisa asked how this was possible, and Kevin's expression turned serious. He explained that humanity had taken a different path than most alien civilizations. The great races of the galaxy relied on technologies that had been perfected over thousands of years, proven and reliable, but also stagnant. They improved slowly, adding minor refinements to systems that had remained fundamentally unchanged for centuries. Humans had no such luxury of time. They were newcomers who needed to catch up quickly or accept permanent inferiority. So they took risks that other races would never consider. They experimented with dangerous technologies, pushed theoretical limits, and built systems that sometimes failed catastrophically, but occasionally produced breakthroughs that leaped over centuries of gradual development. The Admiral took over the explanation, adding context to Kevin's technical details. She said that humanity's greatest advantage was not superior intelligence or better resources. It was desperation combined with creativity. Humans knew they were behind, and that knowledge drove them to innovate in ways that comfortable, established civilizations simply did not. They moved on to see the crown jewel of the fleet. The transport brought them to a private docking bay where a single ship waited. The vessel was enormous, stretching 2 miles from bow to stern. Its hull was darker than the others, seeming to absorb not just light but the very attention of anyone who looked at it. Weapons bristled from every angle, and the power signature that Jake's handheld scanner detected made him check the device twice to confirm it was working properly. Commander Patricia. Moore waited for them at the base of the boarding ramp. She was a woman in her early 40s with the bearing of someone who had spent most of her life in military service. Her uniform was immaculate and her eyes were sharp as she evaluated the visitors. The Admiral introduced her as the captain of the EAS Defiance, the most powerful warship humanity had ever built. Patricia gave them a tour of her ship, and Jake felt like he was walking through a dream. The interior was spacious and efficient, designed by people who understood that crews performed better when they were comfortable. The bridge was a marvel of integrated systems where holographic displays provided 3-dimensional tactical awareness. The weapons control room looked like it could coordinate strikes on a dozen targets simultaneously. The engineering section hummed with power from fusion reactors that could generate enough energy to run a small city. But what impressed Jake most was the crew. They moved with confidence and precision, working together with the ease of long practice. These were not the uncertain explorers of the official fleet. These were warriors who knew their ship and trusted their abilities. Patricia explained that every crew member had trained for years in advanced simulators that replicated combat scenarios against alien technologies. They visited the medical bay where Dr. Henry Cross showed them the bioenhancement facilities. The doctor was an older man with gentle hands and eyes that sparkled with intellectual curiosity. He explained that humanity had been working on extending life and improving human capabilities without losing what made them human. Unlike the Velkari who replaced their bodies with machines, humans sought to augment and enhance their natural biology. The treatments could extend human lifespans by decades, improve healing rates, and enhance cognitive functions. Soldiers could have their reflexes quickened and their strength increased while remaining fundamentally human. The enhancements were subtle but effective, giving humans an edge without turning them into something else entirely. As the tour continued, Jake began to understand the full scope of what had been built. New Horizon was not just a city or a military base. It was a statement of human potential, proof that they could achieve in decades what took other species millennia. Every system, every technology, every innovation represented humans refusing to accept the limitations that others tried to place on them. Admiral Hughes brought them back to her office, a modest room with windows looking out on the city. She offered them seats and then explained the strategic thinking behind Project Sanctuary. Humanity knew they would be underestimated, and they used that perception as a weapon. By appearing weak and primitive, they bought time to build real strength. The galaxy dismissed them as children playing with rockets, never imagining that those children were constructing something that could challenge the established powers. The time for revelation was approaching. Intelligence reports showed the Korthans and other aggressive species becoming bolder in their contempt for humanity. Soon there would be a crisis that forced humanity to show its true capabilities. When that moment came, the galaxy would discover that they had been deceived, and that humanity was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Jake looked out the window at New Horizon and felt something shift inside him. The humiliation at the Galactic Council suddenly seemed less like failure and more like the setup for something greater. Humanity had been mocked and dismissed, but they had used that dismissal to build a future, on their own terms. The question now was, what would happen when the truth finally came out? 3 months passed after Jake's visit to New Horizon, and the galaxy continued to turn with its usual patterns of trade and politics. The human colonies on the frontier expanded slowly, building settlements on worlds that the great powers considered too marginal to claim. Official human ships continued their modest patrols and research missions, carefully maintaining the image of a young species still learning the basics of interstellar civilization. But beneath that peaceful surface, tensions were building. The Korthans had been growing more aggressive. their warlords emboldened by what they saw as human weakness. They began claiming that certain regions of space belonged to their ancient empire, regions that included 3 human colony worlds. The Galactic Council did nothing, considering the dispute too minor to warrant their attention and assuming the humans would simply yield to superior force. The crisis came, without warning, on a quiet Tuesday morning, in the colony of Novaterra. The settlement was home to 50,000 people who had come from Earth seeking a fresh start on a world with clean air and open spaces. They had built farms and small cities, raised families, and created a community that felt like humanity's best hopes for the future. Governor Maria Santos was reviewing agricultural reports when her communication officer burst into her office with news that made her blood run cold. A Corthan fleet had just emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. 20 warships hung in space above Novaterra like birds of prey circling wounded animals. The fleet was led by Warlord Grixtal himself, the same being who had mocked humanity at the Galactic Council. The communication came moments later, broadcast on all frequencies so every human in the system could hear. Grixtal's voice was harsh and filled with contempt as he declared that Novaterra and its surrounding space now belonged to the Corthan Empire. The humans had 24 hours to evacuate the planet completely, taking only what they could carry. Any who remained after the deadline would be removed by force. Maria felt her hands shaking as she listened to the ultimatum. The colony had 2 small patrol ships and a defense platform that was designed to handle pirates and asteroids, not a military fleet. Against 20 Corthan warships, they had no chance of resistance. But evacuation was impossible. The colony had nowhere near enough transport capacity to move 50,000 people in 24 hours. She immediately sent distress signals to Earth and to every human outpost within communication range. Then she did the only thing she could do. She opened negotiations with Grixtal and tried to buy time. She explained that evacuation would take weeks, not hours, and requested an extension of the deadline. She offered compensation, resources, anything that might delay the Corthan assault. Grixtal found her desperation amusing. He granted a 6-hour extension, making it clear that he was doing so not out of mercy but because he enjoyed watching the humans beg. He told Maria that this was the price of weakness, that races who could not defend themselves had no right to claim worlds. He suggested that perhaps humanity would learn a lesson about their place in the galaxy. The distress call reached New Horizon within hours. Admiral Hughes was in a command meeting when the message came through, and the room fell silent as they listened to Governor Santos pleading for help. The recording included visual data of the Corthan fleet, their weapons powered and ready, orbiting Novaterra like a promise of violence. The Admiral called an emergency session of the Security Council, the group of military leaders and civilian officials who guided Project Sanctuary. The debate was intense and voices were raised in ways that rarely happened in that disciplined chamber. Some argued that revealing New Horizon now was premature, that humanity needed more time to build strength and prepare for the inevitable conflict with the established powers. Others countered that, if they abandoned their own people to alien aggression, what was the point of all their preparations? Kevin Palmer pointed out that every simulation they had run showed humanity's fleet was ready for combat. Commander Patricia Moore added that her crews were trained and eager to prove themselves. Dr. Henry Cross spoke quietly about the moral obligation to protect those who could not protect themselves. Jake Morrison attended the meeting as an observer, having been temporarily assigned to New Horizon as a liaison officer. He listened to the arguments swirling around him and then asked for permission to speak. The room quieted as he stood and addressed the council. He said that the Corthans had chosen Novaterra specifically because they believed humans were weak and would not fight back. If humanity backed down now, the galaxy would see it as confirmation of every dismissive judgment they had made. But if humanity revealed their true strength, if they showed the galaxy that underestimating humans was a fatal mistake, everything would change. He reminded them that Grixtal had been at the Galactic Council, had personally mocked human achievements and laughed at their ships. The warlord thought he knew humanity's capabilities and had chosen his target based on that false knowledge. The look on his face when the human fleet arrived would be worth every risk they were taking. The vote was called and the tension in the room was thick enough to touch. One by one, the council members made their choice. The decision was unanimous. It was time for humanity to step out of the shadows and show the galaxy what they had built. Admiral Hughes gave the orders immediately. The fleet would launch within the hour, 20 capital ships including the Defiance, along with 50 support vessels and 3 squadrons of advanced fighters. The journey to Nova Terra would take 4 days at maximum faster than light speed, pushing the quantum slip drives to their limits. The shipyards erupted into controlled chaos as crews rushed to their vessels. Supplies were loaded, weapons were armed, and final system checks were completed with the efficiency of long practice. Families gathered at the observation decks to watch their loved ones depart, knowing they might not return but proud that humanity was finally standing up for itself. Jake returned to the horizon's edge and gathered his own crew. He told them they were joining the fleet as a scout vessel, using their smaller size and agility to provide reconnaissance. Lisa immediately began modifying their sensor arrays to military specifications. Danny coordinated with the fleet tactical officers to integrate their ship into the battle plan. Commander Patricia Moore stood on the bridge of the Defiance as her ship powered up for departure. The massive vessel thrummed with energy as fusion reactors came to full power and weapon systems initialized. Around her, the bridge crew worked with calm precision, each person knowing their role and trusting their training. The fleet assembled in formation outside New Horizon, a display of military power that humanity had kept hidden for 4 decades. The ships hung in space like dark angels, their stealth systems offline so every sensor in the system could see them clearly. This was a moment of statement, a declaration that humanity's time of hiding was over. Admiral Hughes broadcast from the Defiance to every ship in the fleet. She spoke of duty and sacrifice, of the people they were sworn to protect and the future they were fighting to secure. She reminded them that the galaxy had mocked humanity and dismissed their potential. Now they would show the galaxy the price of underestimation. She ended her speech with words that would become famous in human history. She said that humanity had been patient, had been careful, had been quiet while they built strength in the darkness. But patience had its limits and the time for silence was over. Today humanity would roar and the galaxy would hear them. The fleet engaged their quantum slip drives and vanished into faster-than-light travel, leaving New Horizon behind. 4 days of travel stretched before them. 4 days to prepare for a battle that would reshape humanity's place in the galaxy. On Nova Terra, Governor Maria Santos continued her desperate negotiations with Grixtal. She had managed to extend the deadline twice more through a combination of pleading and offering bribes the colony could barely afford. The Corthan warlord was growing impatient, but still amused by the spectacle of human desperation. Maria did not tell him that help was coming. She had received a coded message from Admiral Hughes with a simple instruction to keep the Corthans talking for 4 more days. Maria did not know what help Earth could possibly send that would make a difference against 20 warships, but she trusted that someone had a plan. She looked out her office window at the colony below where people were preparing for evacuation, even though they had nowhere to go. Children were being kept calm by parents who hid their own fear. Farmers were abandoning fields they had spent years cultivating. Engineers were shutting down systems they had built with their own hands. Maria made a silent promise to her people that somehow, some way, they would get through this. She did not know about New Horizon, or the fleet racing through faster-than-light space to reach them. She only knew that giving up was not in human nature, and that even facing impossible odds, humanity found ways to survive. In the darkness between stars, the human fleet pushed, their engines hard and counted down the hours, until they would arrive at Nova Terra, and show the Corthans what happened when you threatened human lives. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, at the edge of the Nova Terra system exactly 4 days after, leaving New Horizon. They emerged in the darkness beyond the outer planets where sensors would have difficulty detecting them immediately. Admiral Hughes ordered all ships to activate their stealth systems, cloaking fields that bent electromagnetic radiation around the hulls and made the fleet nearly invisible to conventional detection. The Defiance's bridge hummed with quiet activity as tactical officers analyzed the situation. The Corthan fleet remained in orbit around Nova Terra, their formation loose and confident. 30 warships now, as Grixtal had called in reinforcements to speed up the intimidation. The warlord clearly expected no resistance and his ships were not even maintaining proper defensive positions. Commander Patricia, Moore studied the tactical display with the eye of someone who had spent years preparing for exactly this moment. She noted the gaps in the Corthan formation, the way their largest ships were clustered together rather than spread out for mutual support. They were behaving like bullies who had never faced a real fight, arrogant and careless. Jake Morrison brought the Horizon's Edge alongside the Defiance, his smaller ship dwarfed by the massive dreadnought. His sensors were providing detailed information about the Corthan vessels, data that Lisa was analyzing and feeding to the fleet tactical network. The enemy ships were powerful, but their shield configuration showed patterns that could be exploited. Admiral Hughes established a secure communication link with Governor Maria Santos on Nova Terra. The relief in Maria's voice was evident even through the encrypted channel. She had been negotiating with Grixtal for 4 days straight, using every delaying tactic she could imagine. The Corthan warlord had grown suspicious and angry, threatening to begin bombardment within the hour. The admiral told Maria to prepare the colonists for what was about to happen. There would be a battle, and while the human fleet was confident, there were no guarantees in combat. Maria should move people to underground shelters and hope that the fighting stayed in orbit, rather than reaching the surface. Then Admiral Hughes addressed her fleet one final time before the engagement. She reminded them that they were not just fighting for Nova Terra, but for every human colony, every settlement, every person who looked to the stars and dreamed of a future among them. The galaxy had dismissed humanity as weak and primitive, but today they would learn the truth. She gave the order and the fleet advanced. 20 capital ships and their support vessels moved in perfect formation, their stealth field still active. They crossed the system at high speed, their quantum drives allowing micro-jumps that covered vast distances in seconds. The Corthans had no idea death was approaching. When the human fleet was within optimal weapons range, Admiral Hughes gave a single command. Every ship dropped their stealth field simultaneously. On every sensor screen in the Corthan fleet, 30 human warships suddenly appeared where empty space had been moments before. The humans were close, dangerously close, and their weapons were already powered and locked on targets. Grixtal was on the bridge of his flagship when the alarms began screaming. His tactical officer stammered in disbelief as he tried to explain what the sensors were showing. Human ships, dozens of them, and their power signatures were impossible. These were not the fragile research vessels the Corthans had seen at the Galactic Council. These were warships that registered as threats even to Corthan battlecruisers. Admiral Hughes opened a communication channel directly to Grixtal's flagship. Her image appeared on his view screen, her expression calm and cold. She identified herself and stated her terms in words that left no room for negotiation. The Corthan fleet would withdraw from Nova Terra immediately and depart human space. They would do this now, or humanity would demonstrate why threatening human civilians was a mistake that species made only once. Grixtal stared at the human admiral with fury and disbelief, warring on his face. His forearms clenched into fists as he processed what he was seeing. These ships should not exist. Humanity should not possess this level of technology. It had to be some kind of trick or deception. He ordered his fleet to battle positions and prepared to attack. The Corthans had numerical superiority with 30 ships against the human 20. His race had been warriors for thousands of years, while humans had been in space for barely 50. He would crush this impudent fleet and then level Nova Terra as punishment for human arrogance. The battle began with the Corthans firing first. Plasma cannons erupted across their fleet, sending superheated bolts of energy toward the human ships. Missile batteries launched, filling space with deadly projectiles. The barrage was impressive, the kind of opening salvo that had shattered enemy fleets throughout Corthan history. The human ships' adaptive hulls shimmered as the weapons struck. The smart matter absorbed kinetic impacts and dispersed energy across the entire surface area. Shields flickered and held. Advanced defensive systems that had been designed specifically to counter known alien weapons technology. 3 human destroyers took damage, but nothing critical, their hulls already beginning to self-repair. Then humanity returned fire, and the Corthans discovered what real devastation looked like. The Defiance's plasma lance arrays lit up space with beams of coherent energy that burned through Corthan shields like they were paper. 3 heavy cruisers lost their defensive screens in the first volley, their hulls exposed to follow-up strikes. Human fighters launched from carrier vessels, small craft that moved with impossible agility. They used micro-jumps to appear and disappear around Corthan ships, firing precision strikes at weapon systems and engines. The pilots were humans who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Their reflexes enhanced by Dr. Cross's biological improvements and their instincts honed by thousands of hours in advanced simulators. Danny Wright coordinated a strike group of 5 human destroyers against a Corthan battleship. The ships moved in perfect synchronization, their attacks timed to hit the same shield section simultaneously. The Corthan defenses collapsed under the concentrated fire, and the battleship's hull began to rupture. Lisa Grant was feeding targeting data to the fleet from the horizon's edge, her enhanced sensor arrays identifying weak points in Corthan ship designs. She noticed that their engine systems had a vulnerability, where the power conduits were poorly shielded. She transmitted the information to the fleet, and human gunners began targeting those specific locations with devastating effect. Commander Patricia Moore watched the battle unfold on her tactical display with satisfaction. The Corthans were strong and their ships were well built, but they fought with the arrogance of a species that had not faced a real challenge in centuries. They expected their enemies to be afraid and their victories to be inevitable. Humanity taught them a harsh lesson about assumptions. The decisive moment came when Admiral Hughes ordered the deployment of the hammer. The Defiance's main weapon had been held in reserve, waiting for the right moment. That moment arrived when Grixtal's flagship moved to rally his fleet for a coordinated counterattack. The gravitational weapon activated, and space itself twisted around the Corthan flagship. The massive vessel's hull began to crumple as localized gravity intensified to crushing levels. Metal screamed and buckled. Internal systems collapsed, and the ship folded in on itself like a tin can in a hydraulic press. The effect lasted only seconds before releasing, but those seconds were enough. The flagship broke apart into tumbling debris, its structural integrity destroyed beyond any hope of survival. Grixtal died, still not understanding how humanity had managed to build such weapons. His last thought was a simple recognition that his species had made a terrible error in judgment. The Corthan fleet lost its cohesion with the destruction of the flagship. Ships began breaking formation, some trying to continue the fight while others moved to retreat. Admiral Hughes offered them one final chance to withdraw. This time there was no hesitation. The surviving Corthan vessels engaged their faster-than-light drives and fled, leaving behind the wreckage of 10 destroyed ships and another 8 disabled and drifting. The human fleet had taken damage, but not a single ship was lost. 2 destroyers would need significant repairs, and several other vessels had hull breaches that would take days to fix properly. But every crew member would return home alive. Governor Maria Santos watched from Nova Terra as the battle ended. She had seen the flashes of weapons fire in orbit, brief stars that bloomed and faded in the darkness. When Admiral Hughes contacted her to announce that the colony was safe, Maria broke down and wept with relief. But Admiral Hughes knew that the battle at Nova Terra was only the beginning. She ordered her communications officer to begin broadcasting on all Galactic Council frequencies. The message included full tactical data from the battle, specifications of New Horizon, and visual recordings that showed the space city in all its magnificent glory. The transmission went out to every corner of known space. Within hours, the galactic community erupted into chaos. News of the battle spread like wildfire. Images of New Horizon appeared on view screens across 1,000 worlds. The understanding that humanity had been hiding capabilities far beyond what they had shown became the subject of frantic diplomatic discussions. Ambassador Thelzar of the Zelthari called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the council chamber once again. But this time the atmosphere was completely different. There was no laughter, no dismissive mockery. There was shock and a certain amount of fear as they realized how badly they had miscalculated. Jake Morrison returned to the council chamber, but this time he did not arrive in the modest horizon's edge. He came in a shuttle from the Defiance, which maintained position just outside Viridian Prime's orbital space. The warship was clearly visible to every sensor on the station, a silent reminder of what humanity could deploy if threatened. The council chamber was silent as Jake took his position on the petitioner's platform. He did not plead or beg this time. He spoke with the confidence of someone who knew his people's worth and expected it to be recognized. He explained that humanity had not hidden their achievements out of fear, but out of strategy. They needed time to build strength without making enemies, time to develop technologies that would allow them to stand as equals. The galaxy had dismissed them as primitive. Children and humanity had used that dismissal as cover while they grew strong. He stated that humanity wished to join the galactic trade alliance not as supplicants but as partners. They offered their innovations, their unique perspective on technology, and their friendship to those races willing to meet them with respect. Thelgzar rose to speak, and his crystalline form seemed dimmer than before.
He acknowledged that the Zelthari had underestimated humanity, and he offered a formal apology on behalf of his people.
He stated that any species capable of building something like New Horizon and defeating a Korthan fleet deserved recognition as a mature civilization. Other council members echoed similar sentiments. Some were genuinely impressed by human achievements, others were clearly motivated by concern about human military capabilities. But the result was the same. When the vote was called for humanity's admission to the Galactic Trade Alliance, it passed unanimously. Jake accepted the council's decision with grace, but without excessive gratitude. Humanity had earned this position through their own efforts, and they would not act as if it was a gift. He informed the council that Admiral Hughes would be arriving within the week to begin formal treaty negotiations, and that humanity expected those negotiations to be conducted between equals. As Jake returned to his shuttle, he looked back at the council chamber one final time. The beings who had mocked humanity just months ago now watched him with wary respect. The galaxy had learned that underestimating humans was dangerous, and that lesson would not be quickly forgotten. The shuttle carried him back to the Defiance, where Admiral Hughes waited. Together they watched the view screen as New Horizon appeared in the transmission, no longer hidden but displayed proudly for all the galaxy to see. The city shimmered in the starlight, a testament to what humanity could achieve when properly motivated. The story of how aliens mocked humans until their space city shimmered into view would be told for generations. It became a reminder that appearances could deceive, that youth did not mean weakness, and that the newest species in the galaxy might also become one of the greatest.